She treasured all of her relationships with family members, friends, neighbors, professional associates, medical professionals, and caregivers. You've all shown through word and deed great love and devotion to Sally. Our gratitude for all of you and all that you've contributed to the quality of Sally's life and the joy she experienced throughout her many years of struggle is beyond measure. We're now going to follow the program as outlined. Thank you for coming.
Grateful for this opportunity to read Reflections on a Beautiful Life, Wednesdays with Sally by Stephen Crandall. One of the greatest privileges of serving patients at a physical therapist is getting to know them at a deeper level as they make their journey through life. I met Sally in July 2001, the year that I started working at Hand and Orthopedic. She was 55 years old and had been living with the disease of inclusion body mitosis for 11 years. From our first meeting, I became aware of her clear understanding of her disease and what it was likely going to do to her over the next period of time. When we started serving Sally, she was winning the fitness competitions at the Holiday Lions Fitness Center because she had the time to dedicate to strengthening her body. I distinctly remember her commenting that she had made the most gains of any other contestant during that season, no doubt. Inclusion body mitosis is a disease that is placed in the adult muscular dystrophy category of medicine. This autoimmune disease causes the nucleus of each skeletal muscle cell in the body to not process the inflammatory proteins that are naturally formed, essentially causing the body to die one muscle cell at a time, gradually leaving the patient without the ability to move. I was a witness to her gradual decline of her body, but also to the growth and expansion of her spirit through the whole experience. Nearly 21 years of learning from Sally will remain a highlight of my career. I remember about 10 years into my serving Sally, I asked her how she remained so positive with this disability and how it appeared that she continued to contrast with her attitude towards it. I never observed her being angry, sad, depressed, hopeless, or unhappy about her situation. We rarely discussed it because it wasn't on her mind. I realized that she deliberately remained upbeat and present with her attitude towards her life purpose. Her answer was very simple and profound. She said that this disease forced her to live in the present, the very here and now. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, not next week, now. She focused on finding purpose in the moment she was in. Having served patients for the past 35 years, I have found very few who have achieved this level of pragmatism. Sally and I often talked about someone that might surprise you that she quoted, John Wayne's character, Rooster Cogburn, as I recall her saying, was quoted as saying, quote, "Enough is as good as a feast," end quote. This quote was originally attributed to Sir Thomas Malory, a 15th century English writer. This phrase has remained my personal mantra after watching Sally find a feast in almost everything she did. Whether it was playing words with friends, planning and executing a party for which she was well known, planting her garden and creating a sanctuary in her patio, or realizing that her new wheelchair could go travel faster and give her more mobility than walking. She found a feast in almost everything she did. It gave her joy in the present to find the feast. The only exception to this philosophy, in my opinion, was the difficulty of finding a feast in a political leader to which she strongly disagreed. She still enjoyed the discussion and opinion sharing on political topics only because she realized she could do very little about it. Sally's intelligence, training, and commitment to enjoying her survival was such a gift to those of us who served her. Many patients helped me help them, but perhaps none so well as Sally did. About 5 years ago, she was suffering from the narrowing of her throat or pharynx, causing her to have difficulty swallowing food. With the skeletal muscle of her throat preventing her from consuming her medication or bites of food without extreme care to prevent the food particles from entering her lungs and aspirating, She needed her throat expanded. Dr. Marshall Smith was willing to perform the needed procedure, but Sally needed to be able to extend her neck 30 degrees further than she was currently able to do so with the tools, so that the tools could be placed in the right position to achieve the goal. By this time, Sally was unable to leave her wheelchair without a mechanical lift. With Sally's ingenious ability to problem solve, we found a way to remove the headrest of her wheelchair, move the wheelchair in almost a table-like position so I could work on her neck to achieve the necessary mobility. She came for the next few months, 2 to 3 times a week, just to work on it. She tried to never allow chance to play role in her life. She prepared every needful thing. By the day of her procedure, we had achieved our goal, and she went through the process without complication, and it was amazingly successful at enlarging her throat. This very procedure likely extended Sally's life for many years because of the freedom to return to eating normal food. This is one of the many experiences with Sally of her skill to problem solve that helped me to use my training on her behalf. Sally gave me an opportunity to practice at the top of my license using every bit of my foundational training to give her the movement, function, and life she could get out of her weakening body. Sally lived for the hours of 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. every day. It took her devoted caregivers 4 to 6 hours every morning to prepare her to live freely for 4 hours. It would then take 3 to 4 more hours to prepare her for bedtime. During those 4 hours, she made the most of life. One of my favorite books of all time is called Tuesdays with Maury, written by Mitch Albom. Mitch was a student of Maury's who would visit him regularly on Tuesdays as he went through the decline of ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. In the story, it highlighted that while Mitch was there to serve Maury, it was Mitch who was being served. Mitch learned through the process of serving Maury, he was learning things about his own life because of the example, reflecting, listening, and courage that Maury demonstrated. Maury's overall belief was, quote, "If the culture around you doesn't work, don't buy it. Create your own," end quote. It was such a privilege to create an environment where Sally could stay present. For the last 15 years, give or take, I have been having my every other Wednesday visits with Sally. They may have been a short exception when she was recovering from a cold or when I was on vacation, but we were very regular with physical therapy to keep Sally moving and functioning. Behind the scenes, it was Sally that was really educating me. Those lessons of life will forever be etched into my soul for the truth, empathy, knowledge, pragmatism, and love that I experienced. Lastly, once a year, I tried to get Sally out for a celebratory lunch on her birthday. One year was a particular highlight. My neighbor manages and operates the Stein Eckerson Hotel in Deer Valley, Utah. It is the only 5-star hotel in the state. My wife, Nan, Julie Cummings, and I were able to take Sally out for the afternoon and treat her like the queen that she is. It was a perfect day. The temperature was perfect. The food was exquisite. The company was ideal, and Sally's ability to get there was amazing. For me, it was a victory over a disease that so limited Sally from what she really wanted to do. I always treated Sally as the athlete, the doctor, the therapist, the exerciser, the teacher, the hiker, and the activist that she was. Sally was able to be served that day as though she had no disease as we sat on the edge of the patio and tasted a version of heaven. Now that Sally has moved forward, she would want all of us to move forward as well and to find the feast in our lives when what we really have is just enough. She would encourage us to find the joy in the present, not to focus on our lives in the past, and not to live in the future. I join with you in this very moment in celebrating our friendship and connection with Sally. At this very moment, I value it as one of my most gracious gifts that will keep on giving because of my Wednesdays with Sally. Thank you, Sally, for remaining with me wherever I go. My enough shall always be a feast because of you.
We're now going to have family members share some of their favorite stories about Sally. And I'm going to start off with a few examples that show who she was. Once when she was a little kid, she did something, I don't know what, but my mom felt like she needed to go to her room for a while. Nowadays they refer to that as time out. But anyway, she went to her room and was in there for a while. And then she opened the door a crack just so her eye could peek out to see what was going on. And my mom said to her, "You can go ahead and come on out now if you can behave." And Sally looked at her and said, "No," and went back in and shut the door. And then there was the time as a teenager. We were in the process of getting ready to have new flooring laid in our kitchen. And the night before, my mom came home from our grocery store, and there were all these poke marks in the old linoleum all over everywhere, deep gouging poke marks in this flooring, in the old flooring. And my mom was just frantic because nobody seemed to know where it came from. You know, how did this happen? We've got to figure this out before the new flooring gets in tomorrow morning, you know. So my mom was quizzing us, and she looked at Sally, and Sally looked at her and finally said, "Well, do you think it might have happened when I did the dishes wearing my new ice skates?" Oh, yeah. And then Sally was well known for just picking out the perfect gift for people. She, I guess, psychoanalyzed them and what they needed and got the right thing every time. Anyhow, we were sort of teenagers. Well, Sally and Georgia maybe were teenagers. Maybe not quite. Sally was a teenager. I don't know how old Georgia was, and I was younger. And Georgia and I used to go in the living room and mess with all the packages under the tree, trying to figure out what was in it, you know, and what was going on. And we'd pick them up and try to peek under paper and fiddle around. And Georgia had this big box that had her name on it. And she picked it up and she was kind of doing this with it. And Sally came walking down the hall and saw into the living room and yelled, "Georgia, put down that pogo stick." So the big secret was out of the bag. Oh, shoot. Anyway, and here's a little vignette from something more recent. Every fall, Sally and I would go on a leaf ride. And our favorite place was Wasatch Mountain State Park. So we would go up to Midway and have lunch at the homestead and then take our ride up through Wasatch State Park. Well, the homestead is an older facility, and they had this crazy little half elevator. It was like this tall and just kind of a little rectangle, pretty narrow, but people could stand in it and go down to the next floor. And Sally could back her wheelchair into it to get down to the next floor. So we went downstairs, we had lunch, and then she got in the wheelchair and we went back up to the main level, and she couldn't get her wheelchair out. It was just stuck. And we were like, oh boy, this isn't good. And just then, this nice-looking, tall, robust fellow came walking down the aisle, and he said, "Do you need some help?" And we said, we were kind of, well, yeah. And he goes, "Well, just hang here 1 minute, I'll be right back." He comes back with 4 of his friends who are as attractive and buff as he was. And they were firefighters who were there for a convention. So these guys just essentially almost lifted her wheelchair right out of the lift. And they were so kind and so nice and so cute. And they said, gosh, is there, just so nice to her. Is there anything else we can do for you? Hope this works out okay and you have a good rest of the day. And we thanked them profusely. And then after they had stepped away and were headed back downstairs, Sally looked at me and said, can we come back up here for lunch again soon? So those are I could tell you a million, but we don't have the time. But anyway, those are some of my favorite. Oh, there's one more. This one's the top of the line. One day, Sally and I were talking, and I can't remember what was going on, but I was trying to help her with something, and it was irritating me. And I have been known in our family as not being the patient one. As a matter of fact, when I was in high school, I drove my dad's 1964 Chevrolet Impala, and I named her Patience. And anyway, I was not a patient person. And Sally and I were working on this thing, and I wasn't getting it to cooperate, and I was huffing and puffing a little bit, but trying to keep myself in order. And she looked at me and she said, well, who would have thought my disability would teach you patience? So now, anybody who would like to share a memory is welcome to come forward. And after that, we'll just follow the rest of the program. And we do have some messages from family members who were unable to be here today. So a few of you in the audience have those, and we'll be reading those. So Georgia will start with messages from our cousin Leslie Nelson and her husband George.
First of all, in my defense, I was not the only one who messed with Christmas presents. There was a particular Christmas, I believe Sally was in high school, and Ron, our brother, had given her a gift, and it was under the tree, and it was about yay, and about this thick, and Sally was bound and determined to figure out what was in this package. And she lifted it, and it felt like it could be a book. But as she maneuvered it around and shook it, it rattled. And she could not figure out what was in that book. Well, lo and behold, on Christmas Day, she opened it, and it truly was a book, a Richard Halliburton travel book, which, if you know, Sally would adore, along with a French's mustard jar with beans in it. He knew Sally. Okay. I'll read notes from Leslie first. Sally had a unique way of giving gifts that would completely express her thoughtfulness and love for the receiver. Not only would her gifts show a generosity of time, they would display her intellectual and emotional depth. Two examples from my life when she showed this kind of caring and talent were at the time of my wedding, and then years later, at the time our infant son, Aaron, passed away. When George and I got married, Sally took the time and effort to collect many important and meaningful quotes and pithy words of wisdom. These perfectly typewritten, colorful cards were compiled and placed in a lovely little wooden box that has held them in a collection for us to treasure throughout our lives. I can't imagine the time and effort that it took for her in March of 1997, when she had a busy and demanding life and schedule. Many years later, in December of 1991, when it was known that our sixth child would be born with a fatal birth defect, and that the pregnancy would end in sadness and loss, Sally got to work to lift the hearts of each of our family members. She collected and made 6 adorable and charming Christmas tree ornaments and personalized them for each one of our children, according to their favorite sport or hobby, including each name. It was honestly so touching and meaningful to have her give such a personal and lovely, heartfelt gift at a time when our feelings were so tender. These ornaments, and especially the one with Aaron's name, have remained dear and sweet reminders of him, and of course, a vivid reminder of wonderful Sally's profound kindness. We love you, Sally. And then George has written, I first met Sally after Leslie Bell and I became engaged, where some family members wondered how this young, wide-eyed, lovesick theater major was going to provide for their daughter, granddaughter, niece, sister, or cousin. Sally was completely supportive from the start. There was never a time in our relationship that she didn't have my back. She was that way with everyone, wasn't she? Always interested in our lives and the things that made us happy. Always cheerful and upbeat, regardless of any disappointments she was experiencing. She could lift an entire room of people with her encouraging outlook. Shortly before she passed, Leslie and I stopped by for a visit. We had to stand in line and wait our turn in the queue of others who had come to talk to her on the phone. When it was our turn, we sat beside her bed and shared stories and ideas. Sally shared a story about her youth that totally captured the essence of this amazing woman. I might have been the last one to hear it, but it bears repeating. Sally's best friend was the Utah hopscotch champion when she was in the 3rd grade. In the preliminary rounds to determine the champion, Sally was paired up against this friend in a best-of-3 competition. Sally claims she was the worst hopscotch player and lost the first 2 games immediately. Their teacher pronounced the victory for Sally's friend and was ready to bring on the next opponent. But Sally insisted that it was a best-of-3 competition and that she needed to play all 3 games. Even when the teacher explained that there was no chance for her to win and come back from a 2-0, Sally held her ground and demanded that they play the 3rd match. The teacher relented, and Sally was soundly thrashed again. Without rancor, Sally joyously relinquished the court, celebrated with her friend in victory, and cheered her all the way to the well-deserved state championship. Isn't that just the Sally that we know and love? A defender of all, a champion of all, and a warrior to the bitter and regardless of the odds. Cheers to you, our dear friend, until we meet again.
So I get to share a few some memories from Tony. So Tony wrote here, Stephanie and I wanted to share our sympathy and support. Sally, as always, was smart, brave, and a companion of courage. Her victory came in being released from her body. Sally was rock star in my world, blessed with cleverness, kindness, and impeccable taste. I remember my visits to Utah when I was young. Sally would walk through George's Market and open things right off the shelf. She always took me to the movies. We all watched Silver Street in 1976, where I learned a new cuss word, and I proudly brought it home to my grandparents. Gene Wilder is forever my hero. Years later, I lived in Utah. It continued when we went to see Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Luckily for me, in those years, I was able to spend time with Sally. Here it is, so near to Christmas. I remember marveling at her themed Christmas trees and how long she kept them up. One of my favorite memories was on the road trip that Gene and Sally made to California, making a stop at my house here in Bay Way. Knowing that Sally acknowledged my detailed driving directions was a true nod of respect. That's true. It meant so much to see Gene and Sally for me, for me to have Stephanie understand the bond that exists in our family that is so much stronger than the distance between us. There was a time when Sally would make her rounds and call me out of the blue. I should have made more time to call her back and to have found myself in Utah again. I wish there were more conversations. I enjoy texting with you over the past few months, and I want you to know that I'm always here to call, text, email, write, or maybe even occasional smoke signal. We are planning to be here in Utah at some point in the spring, and we'll let you know. We love our family, we love you, and we want you to know that you are always in our thoughts. Tony Ingalls.
I'm Sally's niece, George's daughter. Ruth Ann, sorry. When I was little, everything was Sally and Jean. I almost thought they were the same person. Christmas presents were from Sally and Jean. Cards were from Sally and Jean. Phone calls were from Sally and Jean. I got to know Sally as just Sally when I was in college. I had a job delivering Chinese food that kept me kind of late, but Sally needed a fence painted in her backyard, and I volunteered to do it. So as soon as I finished my job, I drove down to Salt Lake, from Logan to Salt Lake. And I probably got there at 11:30, really close to midnight. I knocked at the back door, and Sally invited me into her birthday party. She was throwing a birthday party for one of her cats. And the cat had a birthday hat on, and there was a donut with candles in it, and she had a birthday sign up on the wall. The dining room was decorated. And that was how I got to know that Sally loved to throw a party. It was just her and the cat. But she was having so much fun. The smile on her face was so big, and her love for that cat was so beautiful. She just cracked me up. About 5 years ago, I had a crazy dream about Sally, and I knew that my chance to know her better was limited, so I called her up immediately. And I said, Sally, I have to come bug you. We have to go play in your genealogy. And she said, that sounds great. When can you come? And my husband took time off work so that he could keep our 4 kids, and he bought me a plane ticket. And I flew to Salt Lake, and we got to spend, I think, 3 days going through her drawers of family history and digitizing photos and trying to put names on things. And she told me story after story after story of these people who were so dear to her, people that I sometimes only had very vague memories of or no memories at all. And through Sally, I got to know my great-grandpa George, and I got to know my great-grandma Celia, and I got to know, well, I had known Aunt Flo when Aunt Flo was really old. And she was so sweet and so patient and so funny, but I got to know her as this hilarious teenager, and I got to know her as this brave missionary, and I got to know her as this very brave mother and a valiant sister, and I got to see how hard the Hall family worked to maintain family connections and to show love for each other across great distances. And I got to know a little bit better why Sally and Jean worked so hard to show up for all those little events in my childhood, and why it mattered so much to them to send Christmas presents, and why my grandmother always sent birthday cards and Valentine cards, and I never understood before why holidays were so important to them. But Sally opened that window for me. She let me know these people. And I will love her forever for the time she gave me, even though her time was so precious and it was such a high price to pay to give it. I will love her forever. Thank you, Sally.
My name is Donna Gillespie. I told Jean I would think about this. I taught school with Sally at Liberty Elementary like a bazillion years ago. And at that time, she was a true mentor and became a friend to me. She was the department chair in special ed where I taught, so she was like my boss. And I learned so much from her about teaching and about children, but I learned some other things from Sally, and that's what I'd like to tell you about. I learned that there's no reason to overeat because you only can taste the first 5 bites of anything that you put into your mouth. I learned that red popsicles are the best, but only red popsicles from Highland Dairy. Those are really the best. And I learned as she was teaching my infant daughter, as she was carrying her down the stairs, and she said, Jolie, what do you think? 11, 10? You never just walk down the street or the stairs, I'm sorry, you always estimate first. Isn't that Sally? Yes. Okay. I shared with Sally what we perceived was the last box of clove lifesavers ever to be made in the world. And because of that, she sent me clove candy canes every Christmas until they stopped making clove candy canes. And that's how my kids know Sally. She sends the clove candy canes. I will miss our long conversations on the phone. And I'll miss playing words with friends with her. We didn't get to finish our last game, but I was losing. Because in true Sally fashion, she started with a 7-letter word. I will miss my friend.
I'm, what am I, a nephew-in-law? I'm Braden Hoff. I could only think of really, well, 3 stories really. I remember the parties, the birthday parties. And I always remember there was always a lot of people. And I always enjoyed those. And it wasn't always about Sally. It was always just about having fun and just being there with family. Indirectly, I remember Karen would play words with friends with Sally. And it was going on for quite a while, and Karen would tell me, I can never win. And I would tell her, no, it's just the chemo or something like that. It's just stuff that you're going through, you know. She goes, no, she's just, look at this word, you know. And she would show me stuff, and she goes, how does she get, I don't know, she beat me by 150 points, Braden. How does she do that? So I love that, but I also remember Sally and how willing she was to always teach. Always. And she would always give an example from her life. Such an intelligent person, and she's so confident. Always confident. I remember her telling me a story about, I think it was when she was in college. She was taking a geography class on climates and the different climates of the countries around the world. And she told me that there was going to be a final, and she was told by her teacher there's going to be a final, and we're going to do one country, but I'm not going to tell you which one it is. And she looked at me and she goes, and I figured out what it was. I knew that there was going to be, she would want to do as many climates as she could for that country, and she listed every reason. And she goes, and I figured it was going to be Chile, because Chile has every climate, and it's long, thin, it's got everything there, and so that's all I did was studied about Chile. That was it. And she goes, and come the test, that's what it was on, was Chile. She's just smart, she's right. And she taught me. She taught me. There's one other little story that I kind of hesitate to share, but when Karen and I were getting married, she was looking at the dates, and we were trying to figure out when we were going to get married. And she looked at me and she goes, well, we've got to do it before Kyler goes. My younger brother joins the military, and we've got to do it after this, and we don't want to do it on a Saturday or a Friday because this. And she goes, and if you look here, we've got a Thursday in the first part of August. And she goes, I think I really want to do that date. And I go, well, sure. And she goes, well, it's my Aunt Sally's birthday. And she goes, she's always had kind of a rough time because somebody died on her birthday. And I'd like for her to have it happy again. So that's what I remember about Sally. Thank you.
So I wanted to share a little bit different side of Sally because, God, I wasn't crying until just now. How does that happen? I knew her as a psychologist, and so she supervised me about 25 years ago, and she was the best supervisor I ever had. She's not only wicked smart, as we all know, but she's very wise and perceptive about people, was very wise and perceptive about people. So I've heard some of you talk about that a little bit, how she just kind of knew things. And she knew things about people. And so she brought to being a psychologist, being a special education teacher, working with people with disabilities, speech and language pathologist, and then became a licensed psychologist. So she was the most well-rounded psychologist I've ever worked with in my 25 years. And so I learned a lot from her in my pre-doctoral internship and then postdoctoral supervision when I needed some extra hours, and she supervised me for free, which was pretty impressive. And we became dear friends. So and she's, I've heard some of you tell stories that get at this nature of her. She will her problem solving is, there's a problem and she is going to find the answer. And that worked really well with kids that she did evaluations for, because she would go into depth and learn, put her investigative hat on and do, whatever test was needed and just think through things so very carefully. And then put her beautiful writing skills, as Jean has as well, to describe the people that she did these assessments for. So we transitioned from that to playing Scrabble and just being dear friends. And so I've heard you talk about words with friends, and man, she was even better at Scrabble. So incredible. And we would get pretty competitive. And so one time I was at her house, and I played a word that I was really quite confident about, EFF, and I was going to win the game. It's like the letter F. And she pulled out, whenever we went to play Scrabble, she had this very specific, everything in Sally's house had a very specific place. And so she had an old, Japanese, I think, I don't know what it was. You're nodding your head, like a cupboard, yeah. And that was the game cupboard. And the Scrabble was I don't know the exact games, but something like right above the boggle, just to the very left of the Yahtzee, had to pull different games out in different order to get to the Scrabble game and bring it to the table. And then we would proceed in this pretty competitive, friendly, wonderfully fun Scrabble game. And so when I played I was so excited I was going to win this game for once, and played my word, and she looked it up in her very old Scrabble dictionary, and it was not a word. I had to take it off, and she won the game. And the interesting part was this was the kind, ethical, She had such high moral standards. She called me a week later and said, I pulled out my new Scrabble dictionary and you were right. It was a word. So I loved her dearly, and I will miss my dear friend. Oh, sorry. I'm Tracy Smoot, and I went to the University of Utah school psychology program, and that's how I met Sally.
I don't know who thought about not putting tissues up here. Hi, I'm Emily Walker, and I am a niece. And also growing up, Sally and Jean were like everything to us. All the major holidays, we had a box of stuff. Christmas, Valentine's Day, Easter. If it had treats, we had a box. I remember going to the clubhouse and spending time with our cousins on the Ingalls side. Just being able to get to know people and talk and laugh. And but as I got older, my oldest son was very busy. And I was able to talk with Sally and ask her what I could do to help him to be able to focus and learn. And she was able to give me suggestions, which, because I am me, I didn't follow. And he's still busy and thinks he's dumb, but he's really super smart with the things that he cares about. Anyway, then my second daughter, or my second child, my oldest daughter, we found out in her kindergarten screaming that she had a heart murmur, and we needed to come down to Salt Lake to have surgery done. And Sally and Jean are like, well, come on down, and you guys can go to a show, and it'll be fun, and we'll pay for it. And so it made something that was kind of traumatic be easier to go through. And then a couple of times I came down to Salt Lake for different conventions, and they're like, well, let's go to dinner, and let's go, and it was nice to be able to get to know Jean and Sally more as an adult instead of just a kid. And I remember when after my husband and I were married, we came down and we saw Grandma Evelyn in the nursing home hospital thing she was at. And my husband had his whiskers and everything from hunting, and they gave him the hardest time about not knowing how to shave. It's not bad enough that he's named after a liquor. He doesn't know how to shave either. Anyway, I just love and adore Sally and Jean so much, and after we'd had a couple of kids, I told my husband, I said, I need to, Sally and Jean didn't have any kids, and I feel like we need to preserve their memory, and we need to name one of our kids Sally Jean, and so my fifth child, I'm like, this is gonna be, she's gonna be named Sally Jean, and we kept thinking about it, and it just wasn't the right name, and even though she was born on Sally's birthday, her name is Samantha, and then a few years later, my husband goes, we need to have another daughter. And I'm like, our family is done. And he goes, we need to have another daughter. So of course we had a son. And then we were blessed to have our little Sally Jean. And she's just as big as Spitfire. It's stubborn and funny. How's Sally? And I'm grateful to be part of this family and to get to know these amazing women.
I love gadgets. And figuring out how they work, what makes them work, and a little bit what makes people work and tick. And I get a lot of that through the Ingalls side. And Sally and I would talk about different stuff, a lot of times her garden, what was going on with it. Water wasn't getting to a certain place, or pump wasn't working, and we'd talk through it and come to a consensus whether we were right or wrong. We came to a consensus on it, and I enjoyed talking with her about that stuff because I had a compatriot, somebody who had the same fascination and our brains worked the same way. And I'll miss talking with her and figuring stuff out.
My name is Janice Ingalls. Sally, Georgia, and Jean are my little sisters. I first met the Ingalls clan. I think Sally was about 10 years old. So I got to know them for a few years. In fact, almost maybe 7 years before Ron and I were married. But I saw them grow up. I wanted to tell you about a time when Sally came to California to visit Ron and myself and the kids. And she looked about like this. It was her first trip alone. It was a big deal for her. And my children were fascinated by her, fascinated by her very particular ways of doing everything she did. There was a reason and a method. Where we were more impulsive and a little bit looser in our ways of doing things. We had a powder room just off the living room, and the first evening Sally came, she went into the powder room, and my kids are this big watching everything she did. Well, we found out she was wearing a wig, and she went like this and took off her hair, and the kids' jaws dropped. And then she bent over like this and took out her lenses. It was like taking out her eyes. She changed everything. So my kids didn't know whether this was funny or real or something really bad had happened, but figured it out. Another time when Sally came to see us, my husband had a motorcycle, a Honda 1000 he was very proud of and terrified me, but he loved it. And he took her shopping somewhere in San Jose so she could buy new shoes. When they came back, she's on the back of the motorcycle with him, with bags holding like this. When she bought shoes, I've told you, she didn't buy one pair. In fact, it was like 5 pairs of the same shoe because it was precisely what she wanted. She may never find it again, and so on. So these were all fascinating facts to me. On another visit, on June 18th, she happened to be at our house, and it was a very busy day. It was graduation day at Foothill College, and Ron, as a faculty member that year, was required to be there. We were also celebrating Father's Day. So I had cooked the best dinner I could. I had ironed Ron's gown and the banner and his paraphernalia and was exhausted, and left the table long enough to go and start clearing the table when I realized my baby was about to be born. So Sally had the privilege of being the babysitter, which I'm not sure she'd ever really done, to 4 little kids, just saying, "I'm sorry, but we have to go. Here you are." So for the next few days, while Tony and I are still in the hospital, Sally got to babysit. But Sally, I wanted to say, was spunky. We've seen some of that, but there was a part of Sally, yes, she was witty and funny, but she told me the worst, baddest joke I have ever heard in my life. I could almost not believe it, and she told it well. So there she was. Yes, witty, funny, precise, thoughtful, kind, supportive, and wonderful. And I will miss her more than she knows, and will be forever grateful for her last telephone call to me. An hour or more of her time that was so difficult for her to talk to me. Said just the right words I needed to hear. And I was so proud of her for her courage and we don't always get a chance to make decisions about our lives, but Sally did, and I loved her for it. Thank you.
last memory of Sally was of when I visited her, and she let Elijah have the panda and was just sweet and kind.
I was really just fine staying in my seat. But Amelia insisted on sharing her memory, and I wanted to be up here with her, so I didn't have a special time in college when I got to go down and visit Gina and Sally and get to know them better, or times when my children were young that I got to have special interactions with them. So it hasn't been until more recently that I've had time to go and visit and talk and learn more about them. And as sad as I am that I didn't get to do it sooner, I am forever grateful. Sorry. I need this. I am forever grateful for the time that I did have. It just so happened that when Ruth Ann, I'm Diana, her niece, by the way. Most of you know that. Anyway, when Ruth Ann decided that she needed to come up to do family history, that I was at a place in my life where I could come and be the technology side of it. I could come and help scan documents in while Ruth Ann listened to stories, and I could go grab boxes while she took notes. And then, more recently, my husband and I had been down in St. George for a little while, and then moved back up just 6 months ago. And I finally finished going to school, and all of my children are in school, and I've had more time. And I felt that I needed to use my time to serve and to help others. And I thought, well, I wonder if Sally needs any help with anything. I knew that she'd been having struggles getting caregivers in and things like that. So I called, and she had some evenings that she needed help. So I was able, for about the last month of her life, I was able to go and to help put her to bed in the evenings. And that was my time to get to talk with her and get to know her a little bit better, and to be there when I wasn't necessarily able to be there much before. But I remember I always had to put her my goodness, I can't even think of the word. It's not an iPad, it's you know what I mean, tablet, yes, thank you. I always had to put it just so, and make sure that she had extra styluses on hand so that she could play Words with Friends. And she actually taught me a lot about playing Words with Friends, that you start with the difficult letters, the ones that are the most points, and you just add vowels to either side of them. And chances are pretty good you're gonna come up with a word that's worth a whole lot of points. So anyway, if you guys wanted that tip, there you go. But she was amazing and very smart and witty up until the very end. I know she got so frustrated because she was telling me one night we needed to adjust her seat, and she kept telling me to go. It wasn't right and left. She had very specific, I can't remember if it was wall and door or mirror and door, stairs, anyway, but she would keep getting it swapped which direction she needed. But I wanted so badly to do it exactly how she was saying it that even though I thought that it was probably the other direction, I would do it the direction she said anyway. I was grateful for that time, and I am grateful to have had her in my life and as part of my family.
thank you all for sharing those remembrances. They're just something that we'll all remember and treasure about Sally, and they really capture the total essence of who she was. I always describe her to people as, I have this sister who's just like this totally cosmic person, and she really was. Kind of in closing, I have a poem here that I'm going to read. This is a very lengthy poem, so I'm only going to read 3 stanzas, my favorite stanzas from the poem, which is entitled Ode, Intimations of Immortality by William Wordsworth. Our birth is but a sleep and forgetting, the soul that rises with us, our life's star. It hath had its elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. Not entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory, we do come from God who is our home. Thanks to the human heart by which we live, thanks to its tenderness, its joys and fears. To me, the smallest flower that blows can give thoughts that do often lie too deep for tears. Though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass or glory in the flower, we will grieve not, rather than find strength in what remains behind. That concludes our services for Sally, and we'll now prepare to travel to the Huntsville City Cemetery for her burial. And we'll need the pallbearers to step forward.
If you guys, all the pallbearers, if you'd like to meet me out through these doors here, we'll give you further instructions, okay?
Perfect. Is it possible to put some of these flowers where I could pick them up later rather than take them to Huntsville? What? He's on the right. Let's see. The cemetery. We should take this one. Is that just dead in a minute? Okay. Yeah. So then
There's also one back on the table with the photo.
oh, and photos. I would like those photos once they're picking up the frames. If you could keep those for me.